new things while COVID was going on. I was like, I'm going to learn some new stuff, and this is my 200th episode. As I told you, it's been a year, almost 2 years now since I started the podcast, and so it's been difficult, especially during COVID, because I had a list of people that I wanted to interview face to face at shows, but obviously, as we progressed with COVID and everything, it's like, okay, well, no, I gotta pull the pin on Julie Reiner, and I gotta pull the pin on Eric and Angus and that sort of thing, and yourself. Because I don't know the next time we're going to be crossing over at an actual show. So, yeah, I really appreciate your time, because I know that with the new book coming out, which we'll get to, you've been you're always busy to start with. I'm curious, has the technology curve been difficult for you? Or have you just been a duck to water when it comes to like just being able to jump on Zoom calls and webcams and whatnot?
Well, the first week, and then you got it, so it's, I've been doing it since, I guess, June now, June. And so I've done Instagram, a lot of Zoom. And now this new format where you're actually in different rooms and you have an avatar. Today, my primer this morning for the upcoming Sante symposium was the first time I've been on that platform, and I will be learning it over the next week, because we have a date in November to join the Sante symposium, and in an actual rooms where we can walk around and walk up to different tables and enjoy what they're doing and watch their little videos, and it's pretty extraordinary. And then you go into it, and then you go into the big room where the seminars take place. There's a big screen, and that's where my PowerPoint will play for the evolution of the martini, which, by the way, is a chapter in the recipe section of the book called The Evolution of the Martini, starting obviously with Jerry Thomas's 1888 printed version, and then going up through the new millennium. And we stop off at 5 different eras, and my partner, Eric, will make from William Grant. William Grant was really a wonderful partner in this, because they didn't do what the typical liquor company does, is, oh, you got to use my brands for everything.
Yeah.
We start with a Ginevra, in the fancy gin cocktail, which I consider to be the granddaddy, 1862, Thomas's book. I consider that to be the kind of granddaddy of the martini, because it's gin with dashes and splashes. It's the same format, same architecture. And then I move into the 1888 era, when the 50-50 martini started, and the 50-50 stayed throughout the whole 19th century, right up to Prohibition. The last 50-50, it wasn't called a martini, it was called a cocktail, the 50-50 cocktail. There's a lot of people at the end of the 19th century had real respect for Harry Johnson as one of the fathers of the profession, and they were loath to call anything else a martini except this thing, which had Old Tom, sweet vermouth, a dash of bitter, a dash of curacao. To them, that was the classic martini. So when they graduated to London Dry Gin and Noilly Pret Vermouth, which was one of the first dries available in our country, they called them cocktails, or named them after Charlie Mahoney, named it after himself at the Hoffman House and after some of his customers, but they didn't yet. And then you go in the same volume to their martini recipe, and it's Harry Johnson's recipe.
So where did your journey start? How did you get into the game? Because, it's interesting how I think there's going to be a lot of parallels with your career with a lot of younger modern bartenders, because of the same sort of hurdles and that sort of thing. How did you get the start in the game?
I was studying theater arts at the University of Rhode Island, and we had a little play up at the Yale Drama Festival, which was reviewed by a critic from the New Yorker magazine, who was at that time the elderly critic from the New Yorker magazine, as the best thing at the Yale Drama Festival. I went back to the university, packed my bags, and went to New York, moved into the House YMCA on 34th Street, and was absolutely sure that I would be on the Broadway boards within months, and I was. But you're 30 seconds in New York, and you realize that life happens in the bars. I don't care where you are, what neighborhood you're in. People gravitate toward the bars to do their business, lead their lives, because there are literally thousands of them, and people have their extended families in their neighborhoods at their corner bar, So I quickly, found my way first, into restaurants, but I did all kinds of crazy jobs. I put up posters around town. I was a moving man. I was a chauffeur. I did everything, but I always, I kept a foot, a foot in the bar world or in the restaurant world, because I started as a dishwasher. To tell you the truth, Shawn, you'll never guess where, in Howard Johnson's in Times Square. I'm dead broke. I'm living at the YMCA. I need money coming in. I need cash flow. And I got an acting class lined up, which I couldn't afford, but I talked the very prestigious acting coach into allowing me to clean his studio to get free lessons and set it up, for the lessons. And I went into the Howard Johnson's because there was a sign in the window, dishwasher, and I went and found the manager, and he said, "We're not hiring." I said, "What do you mean there's a sign in the window?" He said, "That's a dishwasher." I said, "Yeah, and well, you speak English." I was a babe in the woods. I had no idea what he said. And I said, "You mean because I speak English, I can't get the job?" And he said, "No, you idiot. You can have the job if you want it." I have to tell you, some years later, because I knew his daughter, I got to go hang out at a book signing that Jacques Pepin was doing with it. And his daughter brought me. She said, "Did you ever meet my dad?" And I said, "Oh, come on, I'm going to my dad's book signing." So we went in, and we finally, when the line petered out a little bit, she brought me up and she said, "Dad, this is Dale DeGroff. He works at the Rainbow Room." So, "Oh, show bum, the Rainbow Room, the cocktail guy, here's somebody, And I said, "Well, actually, I've got to tell you the truth, Jacques. I started out at Howard Johnson's." And he goes, I too start in this place." I said, "Come on. No, when they make the hotels, the Howard Johnson company, I was in Paris and they bring me to New York to put me into this place in Times Square where we invent the dishes for the hotel. I make the fried clams there and this one and that one, And I said, "Oh my God, Jacques, we were probably there at the same time and we were colleagues. You were inventing the dishes and I was washing them." Anyway, I had a lot of jobs, here and there, and waiter first, and then eventually I became a service bartender and then a bartender. Actually, my very first bartending job was at Gracie Mansion, where the mayor lives in New York City, because I was a waiter at a pretty fancy place called Charlie O's, which had been a Joe Baum Restaurant Associates place, but they sold it to a young guy whose dad was really rich. And his dad was in the garment industry and gave a lot of money to politics. So when he got the restaurant, pulling a few strings, he got his kid's restaurant to be to do all the parties, to cater all the parties at Gracie Mansion. And I remember finishing my lunch shift, as a waiter, and this frantic manager comes through the dining room. "I need a bartender now," and the two guys behind the bar, the professionals, they were union. They didn't need to go to a gig where they had to load a truck and unload it and load it again and unload it again. You know what I mean? They had no interest in that, And I said, "I'm a bartender, So she said, "Well, good. Get your stuff and come with me." And I said, "Well, okay, let me get gathered up." And I ran over to the bar to one of the guys, Mike, and I said, "Mike, write down the 10 top drinks on an index pad for me. I'm going over to Gracie Mansion and I'm a little nervous, "Dale, don't worry about it," he says. You won't need it. It's just going to be Chardonnay, vodka rocks, Scotch on the rocks, highballs, Perrier. Don't worry, Tab. You're not going to have to take anything." I said, "Please, Mike, just a couple of drinks down there, just in case, Well, all right, So he wrote them down. Of course, he was right. Set up a banquet bar. That's all I served. And the occasion of the party at Gracie Mansion that day was Mayor Beam. It was giving the keys of the city to Rupert Murdoch, who had just bought the New York Post. And I ended up in my Rainbow Room days, post Rainbow Room actually, getting a call from a caterer friend of mine who did really fancy VIP parties. And he said, "I've got a gig for you, man. You're going to make drinks named after important things in his life, Murdoch." And I said, "Cool, I'm in, man." So his new young Japanese wife, they live in a duplex condo in Soho. I went down there and I set up my whole bar and everything. And it was so surprised, but by then the surprise was over. So he comes up to the bar and he goes, "So you're a hot shit cocktail guy, eh?" And I said, actually, Mr. Murdoch, our fortunes have risen together in this town. Anyway, that's my story, starting out in New York and then going to LA for a while. And I was lucky from the day one. I was lucky in New York because I knew the advertising agency that did the advertising for Restaurant Associates, which Joe was the president of. And I got to be at table with him, got to dine in restaurants that were more expensive than my rent. This was all because my best friend's older brother was one of the partners in the agency. And we were just kind of filling out the table, if you will, at these big events where we would try out menus for new restaurants or old restaurants that were changing menus. And we were just filling places in a sense. But I did get to meet Joe, and it was the beginning of what would become my real career when I got back from LA. But I worked at Charlie O's, which had been a Joe restaurant. And then I went out to LA and I got a job in one of the top 10 hotels in the world, the Hotel Bel Air in Stone Canyon. Very exclusive place with only 65 rooms, and you couldn't get a room unless you'd stayed there before. Figure that one out.
So where did the passion for the cocktails and that sort of thing, like obviously the cocktails have been around for eons. What was the cocktail culture like in New York around that time when you sort of started really diving in and delving into it?
Well, actually, the bars were wonderful. The bartenders were wonderful. Every bar in New York had a gun with sour mix coming out of it. Every bar. Bartenders knew how to make decent martinis, decent Manhattans. And boy, let me tell you, in Midtown at the fancy cocktail lounges, you got one hell of a scotch, 2.5 ounces minimum. And there was no jiggering. If you jiggered, that was the cheap Irish bars out in the neighborhood. If you jiggered, people wouldn't even go back, They expected a healthy pour, highballs too, and that was the run of the mill. I mean, there were things that people were drinking like Stingers, but Stingers all alcohol. It's white cream to mince and cognac. You shake it up. It's not going to be who can mess that up. But things like sours, they were using the gun, and margaritas were using the gun. So your sours, your margaritas, your Tom Collinses, they all tasted the same because the stuff out of the gun was the main flavor. Sometimes you couldn't tell if it was a vodka sour or a gin sour. Or you couldn't tell if it was a margarita or what. So anyway. That the bars were no less interesting and no less fun, because what makes bars anyway? The people that are in them, and the bartender standing behind them. It is what it is, And I certainly, it took the young craft guys a little while to figure that one out and realize that nobody cared as they had their tweezers that they made their own quinine, their own tonic, that people were not there for that reason. They were there for another reason. I mean, some were obviously, but the idea of getting past that, and not that I have anything to say but great things about the craft movement. And that's one of the reasons why I redid the book, because I wanted to shine a light on these talented guys, and many of them are my friends. And I wanted to tell the story of how the craft movement and why the craft movement emerged when it did. And that's in the front of the book, where the author, I have an author's introduction. So what happened was, this was not my big idea, by the way. I took to bartending like a duck takes to water because I'm friendly. I can get over with people in a really, and even when I was starting out and had no clue, I had the little tricks. I had, I haven't made a single thing in forever. How do you like it? Hoping they'd give me the recipe, of course. And you get over if you're friendly and you're solicitous. People don't care. That's what they want. They want somebody behind that bar who recognizes them and engages with them, and you can learn on the way. And that's what I did, in fact. And then I went to the Hotel Bel Air, and that was a different story. I got the gig there for one reason and one reason only. There were no HR departments yet. Number one, there were more than one reasons, I guess, because HR departments would have certainly insulated me from that job. Believe me, let me tell you. But I had heard that there was a day gig available because they had fired the day man, and I got there right away. I drove my '69 Dodge Dart out there and valeted, walked over the Swan Pond arched little bridge and right into the bar, it was all laid out like a beautiful garden with bungalows, and you didn't really walk through a lobby, which is why a lot of people love this hotel. There's a lot of privacy. You can drive your car behind your bungalow and nobody saw you, President Kennedy stayed there when he was interviewing Marilyn Monroe. But anyway, I walk into the bar and there's this big guy, he looks like a substitute teacher because that's what he was. He was the executive bartender and he had an office and he didn't step behind the bar anymore. He planned, Ronald Reagan's kid's wedding. That's what he did there. And so I walked in and said, "Here, you're looking for a day man." And he paused for a minute, maybe saying, drop a resume at the front desk or something like that, but he didn't. "Where'd you work?" "In New York." I said I was from New York. And he said, I said, "Charlie." "Oh, I've heard of it." "What was a Joe Bomb place?" A lot of people had heard of it, "Okay, step behind the bar here. Pour me a shot. Anything, just pick up a bottle and pour me a shot. Okay, make me a sidecar." They, believe it or not, even the Hotel Bel Air had a gun with sour mix. And everybody did. That was America. That was prohibition. That's what it did to us. Anyway, I made a sidecar. I mean, who couldn't, shot of sour mix, a little bit of brandy. It's just simple. Anyway, I got the gig, for a week tryout, and that turned into but when I saw the bar back, and I'm looking at vintage port, vintage character port, tawny port, I'm just, and then I start the other side. I'm looking at Armagnac and Sauterne and thing, and my Charlie O's was a really cool place, but it didn't have a back bar like this back bar, And so my job was to polish the bottles, and of course he was no dummy. He knew that I was wet behind the ears because as I polished those bottles and read the labels, and because it was the day shift, there was no one around, have a little nip once in a while, see what they tasted like. I learned a lot about what I had on that back bar, So that really got me seriously thinking about this profession. And there was a great piano player. I eventually got the night shift, and that was especially interesting. So when I had the opportunity, the steward at the hotel was a youngish guy, a couple years older than me, really interesting guy, graduated out of Harvard, had a degree in philosophy, perfect way to get into the restaurant business.
Still now, even now, a degree in philosophy is a perfect opening to get a job as a bartender.
Those 7 philosopher positions are filled up pretty quick, Anyway, his dream, of course, was his friends were up at Berkeley, and they had all moved out to the Bay Area, living in Emeryville and Berkeley, and their dream was to open a restaurant. So eventually his dream was to get out of the stewarding job at the Hotel Bel Air and get back up to the Bay Area so they could open their restaurant. They called themselves Le Clan Ordinaire. And they did eventually open Bucci's restaurant, which is just closed after 29 years of operating. But I was going to be a partner in that when the piano player died. And after about 6 years at the Bel Air, it was time to move on. And so I went up to San Francisco with Paul to look for properties and to look for a job because we were 6 months away from opening, and I had 2 young children by then. I met my wife in LA, and I realized that there were no bartending jobs in San Francisco that had, except for in the hotels that had medical, and you had to, several people had to die before you could get a job in a hotel because the list of people waiting to get into those jobs, which were magnificent jobs, was just so long, and I got a call from New York saying that Joe Baum was opening a small place on 49th Street French with a 2-star Michelin chef and needed a head bartender. I packed up the family and back I went, and that's how I got started with Joe. Working, and what does he say to me when I walk in for my interview? He says, "Dale, and he remembered me from the advertising days because I had worked for the agency that did his advertising, and I had been at table with him back in the early 70s, And he says, "I want a classic 19th century cocktail program here in this place. I don't want any, I'm not going to have a soda gun behind the bar. I don't want any mixes of any kind." And I'm thinking, what the hell does he mean? Because I had never done anything except sour mix. Every once in a while, a guy at the Hotel Bel Air would say, "Could you squeeze some limes and make me a regular margarita instead of using that shit in the gun?" And I would do that for them, squeeze all the limes up, but that was just a rare occasion, right? And so I said, "Okay." And then he said, "What I really, really want you to do, Dale, is I want you to tell the stories. because he knew that I knew Ron. Ron was a partner in the agency, and Ron was a storyteller, and he told stories at table about Joe, about everything, you know, and he knew I knew those stories. So he told me, if you know, if, and he could see that I was kind of, I actually said, do you think we should have a couple of bottles of really good sour mix, you know, a more premium brand, in case we get backed up at the bar? He says, you know, Dale, do you think they had bottled sour mix in the 19th century? I said, "Oh, probably not." He said, right. And they were probably pretty busy, weren't they? He says, if you can't figure this out, I'll find somebody who can. I said, no, I got it. I got it. He said, well, go look for a book called How to Mix Drinks by Jerry Thomas. Didn't say another word about it. So after the third bookstore on Fifth Avenue, I ended up at Scribner's, which was the classy bookstore. And the guy there said, let me look in the old and rare. He said, you know something, pal, this book was first published in 1862, and the last publication was a version of it in 1928. I don't think you're going to find it, pal. So I talked to some friends of mine who had, well, one of Joe's partners. I said, how can I get this book? He said, I actually have that book. And I said, I'm going to lend it to you, and I'm going to try to find you some other stuff that you really need to do this gig. And he lent me the books, and I started working on a menu for, first of all, for this little French restaurant, which I could not understand, because we had a big copper bucket of beautiful champagnes. The chef was a Parisian, and he loved the wines of Burgundy, and that's what we were selling. And why am I making this 19th century cocktail list? You know, and there's Dale Chilhooly, the famous glass sculptor, with Joe across at the banquet across from the bar, and Phil George and Milton Glaser, who ended up doing our menu, our beautiful menu. He was a graphic artist at the Rainbow. Wow. And I said to Ray Wellington, one of the cellar rats from the Kevin Zraeli days at Windows on the World, what the hell's going on? Because Benny Goodman had just sat down at my bar and asked for Joe. He said, it's a Rainbow Room thing, man. I said, Rainbow Room thing? What Rainbow Room things? Well, where have you been? Joe's been working for 8 months on the restoration. He's got another year to go over there in 30 Rock, RCA building, GE building. Where have you been? And I'm like, well, apparently not in the know. And I immediately thought to myself, man, I want this gig. And I realized why. I was just a lab rat for Joe, putting together the stuff that he was going to do over there, you know, and try, because we certainly weren't selling a lot of it here, you know. I mean, we sold some. I created a couple of champagne drinks just so we could move something. But he was not interested in creativity for the Rainbow. He wanted classics, you know, and he wanted them done properly with proper ingredients. So I put together a menu and presented it to him, and he liked it. And
how did back then, like, especially Joe yourself, like, how did you figure out the drive without sort of any external influences? Because I think we talked about this on the phone the other day, is like, nowadays you've got social media, like you can flick through your Instagram and you can get inspired from Instagram pictures and recipes and stuff. The internet, if you want to try and find an old recipe from Jerry Thomas, you just type in the name of the recipe and up it pops. Like, how?
Okay, I had the old Waldorf bar book. I had the Jerry Thomas book. I had a book called Bottoms Up, published in 1951. It was a perfect snapshot of drinks being served at the finest cocktail lounges around the world. I had those kinds of books, which I delved into deeply, you know, doing a lot of experimenting with. Bottoms Up, you know, that was the one that had the Vargas pictures of naked women and everything, but the recipes were,
I've got a first edition.
really very classy book. You know what I'm saying? It wasn't pornography by any stretch of the imagination. It was an extraordinary book. And that was extremely helpful. You know, looking at what Jerry Thomas did was extremely helpful. And, you know, trying to find ingredients. I had nowhere to look. I just called people up. I mean, I needed all the bitters that were available at the time. Angostura was easy because I had actually worked for them for a little while. But Sazerac, I mean, the Peychaud bitters, nobody had it anymore. You know, it's like you couldn't find it. So I called friends in New Orleans, and I found out, you know, that you could buy it down there, and could they ship it? They gave me the so-and-so's making it. And finally, after a lot of work, I got them to ship some up to me, but it was, you know, a pain in the neck. And then there was a stuff called Fee Brothers, and they had a couple of varieties of bitters. But as Ted Hay will tell you, You couldn't find that anywhere outside of Rochester, New York, because the old man who was running it had just sort of, he was the chemist, he was old, and he made his money with his father during Prohibition. They did like juniper oil and stuff like that to get through Prohibition. And after Prohibition, they never really pursued, because the cocktail didn't come back in any real way. So nobody wanted the bitters anyway. And it was kind of, dying on the vine. And it was his son, Joe Fee, who sadly passed this year, who really, and his sister, who really revived that company about 15 years ago and took it to the moon. I mean, different flavors and everything. But that's what I was up against. The bitters I had behind the bar were Angostura and Peychaud's. Gary Reagan was making orange bitters in his kitchen, and he supplied me, and about 2 other people around Manhattan who were doing these weird drinks. And that's where Gary Reagan number 6 bitters came from. By the way, the one that's in the bottle wasn't the one that we had, because when they turned in the sample to the TTB, because it was being made at Sazerac, so it had to be cleared. I don't think they had gotten the clearance for food additive yet. You know what I'm saying? Because it's 45% alcohol, and you have to be called a food additive like Angostura bitters in order to be sold in grocery stores, but they didn't have that classification yet. And they had to get cleared by the TTB because they considered it. And they said, well, we'd like it to be a flavor additive, not a beverage bitters. And they sent back a note saying, this tastes too good. I'm sorry, can't do it for you. You want it to be a flavor additive, you got to give it more flavor, and it's got to be undrinkable. It's got to be undrinkable. So Angostura, by the way, if you look at the 19th century posters for it, it shows a beautiful young woman sipping a little copita of Angostura bitters, because they used it as a stomach tonic and they drank it, and Angostura bitters is in beverage. Bartenders drink it now, they take shots of it. If that stuff came to the TTB today, it would not be accepted, but it's grandfathered in, it's a done deal.
There's an island just off the west coast here. There's an island off the west coast here in I think it's in the US, and they are an island during Prohibition. That's what they did. They brought in massive bottles of Angostura, and they still have the 50 shot club. So you go to the bar and you get 50 shots of Angostura and you get your name on the wall.
I didn't know that. That's fantastic. Yeah.
And they're the biggest buyers and sellers of Angostura bitters in the world, because they just get the big bottles in, they take the dasher off, and they just pour it like whiskey.
I really need to know that. I need to know about that place. I'm surprised I don't. Anyway, so that was the scene when I was at Aurora. I looked around to see what other people were doing on menus, and guess what, Shawn? There were no menus in Manhattan. Not a single fancy cocktail lounge in Midtown had a menu. The Store Club was gone. The Colony was gone. The Copa was in between being gone and coming back, but none of them had menus. I mean, where you found drinks on a menu? Brunch. The one place, the 3 places where I found drink menus were the Bull and the Bear in the Plaza, the Waldorf, that was in the Waldorf Astoria, Bull and Bear, and the Plaza Oak Room, and the what do you call it, King Cole Bar. And they had menus that were in a drawer behind the bar for Europeans. And they were old menus. You could see they were folded in, dirty. This just simply wasn't happening. People were drinking highballs. They were drinking martinis, Manhattans. The occasional whiskey sour was made with a gun, and some people got a taste for that. Others said that ain't a whiskey sour. So people just simply weren't drinking cocktails, and so there was no need to have a cocktail menu. So I created this one. This was close to my first one in 1987. It had Milton Glaser graphics, as you can see. And my first menu in 1987 had the Algonquin, the Americano Highball, the Between the Sheets, the Bronx, the Coffee Cocktail, the Colony, the Flamingo, the Floridor, Jack Rose, Manhattan Margarita, Martini, Moscow Mule, Negroni, Old Fashioned, Pink Lady, Planters Punch, Ramos Fizz, Sazerac, Sidecar, Stork Club, Southside, and 20th Century. And the bartenders were ready to hang me from the nearest light post. Even though we had 2 months of training coming into this, when we opened our doors, Shawn, we were 6 deep from day one. There was no friends and family. There was no 2 weeks of opening, pains or whatever like that. We had the only opening thing we had was the Rockefeller Center family party. That was our friends and family. So I had to go to Joe with this menu and say, Joe, it's not working. I got to cut the menu down. So I cut it down to this menu with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 drinks, almost just over half of what was on this, under half of what was on that, because we were not able to produce these with the speed and the accuracy that we needed. And I hadn't really figured it out yet. So it took me 6 months before we were making good drinks. But people hung in there with this in the front bar. It was easier because we had the front bar, and we had to make everything a la carte anyway. So what I did, a la menu. So what I did in the back, like for example, the Singapore Sling, I put the spirits together in a gallon jug in the right proportions, and then I would put the final volatile ingredients at the moment of sale. What else did I do that for? I did it for the the Long Island iced tea, which was not in the menu, but was a very popular drink in that era. I had all the spirits in a gallon jug, one half, one. And I poured an exact 2.5 ounce pour with that because it was one half of the 5 spirits. I didn't believe in the 1 where you're getting 5 ounces of alcohol. That was just plain stupid. And made in the 2.5 ounce version in a big iced tea glass with fresh lemon juice, it was a good drink, but made with all alcohol and sour mix, it was a terrible drink. So we were selling them like crazy, but we could pre-batch partially, leaving out the volatile ingredients. The Negroni, basically we could do the Negroni, but I had to take that off 2 years after we opened. People hated Campari in that era. Oh, that's too bitter, And there was no Aperol. The Campari for beginners wasn't even in the country yet. And so I really I left the Americano on because it was a long drink, and I didn't understand the Negroni when I first put it on the menu. I served it up. Hello. There's not an Italian on the face of the earth that ever drank a Negroni except in a big double old-fashioned glass over lots of ice, because they understand bitter ingredients and that the water helps ameliorate. And by the time you finish that drink, all the ingredients have come together beautifully and there's no bitterness. But with up drinks, with the up Negroni, 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, it gets warm. And as it gets warm, it gets more bitter. There's no water to make things happen, on a molecular level, to smooth it out, to release flavors, to bring the 3 ingredients together. That's why the Italians drank it that way. They understood bitter aperitivos.
That's always my argument when I get them a Negroni up. I'm like, Italians know how to entertain. The drinks are poured over ice, stirred quickly with the finger if you're Gaz Reagan, and with an orange twist, and you send it out. There's no mixing glasses. There's no mixing glasses. There's no dumping. There's none of this. It's simple and easy because they want to go and entertain and hang out with their friends.
I keep telling bartenders the straightest line between you and the customer. Find the straightest line. Why would you take an old fashioned, muddle it in a mixing glass? What's the point of that? Why especially if you're doing the old fashioned where you put the cherry and the orange and then why wouldn't you just muddle it in the bottom of the glass you're going to serve it in, ding, 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 and then put the ice cubes in and then you build it and then they pass it across the bar because you're done, easy peasy. There are so many drinks that lots of muss and fuss gets involved when you really don't need it. I piss off all my craft friends when I say, I don't think this dry shake makes it any better, And by the way, the dry shake was created at Pegu Club by a young man who had a bad back. And shaking really hard with a lot of ice, he was in absolute terrible pain. So he shook a whole lot first without the ice, and then he put the ice in and shook a little bit and then poured it out because it made it easier on his back, And that's sort of where the dry shake came from. But somebody had the bright idea that it emulsified the egg better, But I made thousands of Ramos Fizzes at the Bel Air Hotel because it was our brunch drink, and that was one of the drinks we had to make from scratch, And I shook the hell out of it, and I got plenty of foam. I never had to worry about it. and I did not have time to stop along the way with a dry shake and then go back and then ding it, ding it, ding it, ding it. And now they have the reverse dry shake. Yeah, I'm not on. I mean, it's nice if you want to do that and you're not too busy, go for it. It gives you something to talk about with the customer. It makes you seem like you're a chemist. But I don't think it has damn bit how
I've
much.
gone one step further. I put Negronis on tap because we sell so many. So I just put Negronis done, diluted, pour it over the ice, give it a stir. Out she goes.
Sounds good. Bartenders in COVID are starting to cut some corners. They're putting those cocktails in cans and bottles and happy to sell them. And they're putting them on. Well, they started putting them on draft a long time ago. Cocktails on draft. I mean, why not? If you can make it work and you're using quality ingredients, that's what counts.
So fast forward a little bit. What was the first year? What was the year that the first Craft the Cocktail came out?
Well, I signed the contract in 2000, and it came out at the end of 2001, August of 2001, right before 9/11. And that's why I wrote the author's introduction to the new Craft of the Cocktail 2020, because it gave me the opportunity to address 9/11. And that's what I do in the author's introduction. I talk about that era and what happened, and then I move into the history of the cocktail, where it gave me the opportunity to talk about where the craft cocktail came from. And in the author's introduction, I tell the story of, we had lost our, in the 90s, we were operating both Windows on the World and the Rainbow Room. First, we started with the Rainbow Room, and then the Port Authority of New York, New Jersey wanted somebody to reopen Windows of the World after the first bombing, and they went back to Joe, the man who opened it for the first place, and Joe and the team said, yeah, okay, we're going to do it. And they worked on it, and I did training down there too for cocktails. And they brought in a beverage manager, really mostly a wine person named Andrea Emmer, who was a cellarette under Kevin. And so it was a perfect match. And she, in my opinion, has one of the best palates in the business and one of the best noses, and is a master of wine. And there aren't very many of those, And she took over down there as beverage manager, and I continued as beverage manager, head bartender up at Rainbow. We lost our lease at Rainbow, bad negotiation with Jerry Spire of Tishman Spire, one of the big management groups in the city. You see, we were in a 13 building complex called Rockefeller Center that was owned by, an 11 building complex that was owned by the Rockefellers, and they sold it to the Mitsubishi Property Company back in the 80s, and then real estate went on the rocks in the 80s, and Mitsubishi Properties went bankrupt at Rockefeller Center, and the bank ended up, it was in receivership, and then Goldman Sachs put together a group of buyers. They were the 51%, and then Tishman Speyer took 20%, and the Agnelli family in Italy, which owns Fiat, took 20%, and then the Rockefeller family members and other investors took the other 5%. And they got in at bottom dollar, having sold at top dollar. So everybody made money who had a piece of the old Rockefeller Center, mostly the Rockefeller family members. But yes, in that negotiation, we ended up losing our lease after 13 years. And I opened a little place that we owned the lease on, Aurora, the place I first went to work for Joe, as a turnkey, and I worked there for a while. And then that went under for reasons I don't want to get into now. They changed the business plan right close to opening, and it threw everything out of whack. I wanted a downtown lounge uptown, open at 4, close at 4 in the morning, because the W Hotel had opened on Lexington Avenue, and they were dumping a lot of people in our neighborhood at like 2 in the morning. And I wanted to have a baby grand jazz piano player with a real good musician and just do great cocktails, and have bar food, and cocktail waitresses. I didn't want any fancy chef or fancy waiters. But they changed their mind and they wanted to have lunch, and that blew it all out of the water. So we closed after 10 months, but it was great. I hired Audrey Saunders there. I had been wanting to hire her for years because she came to my class way back when she got started at NYU. I was teaching a class on Jerry Thomas, and she always wanted to work for me for nothing, she said in the beginning, because she wanted to learn the craft, but I was at the Rainbow Room, and it was it was a union shop, and I couldn't do that. But this was an opportunity for us to work together, and it was lovely for both of us. Anyway, sitting at the bar was a guy named John Hodgman, who's now an actor and a comedian and a book writer. But he was an agent, and he worked for an agency called Writer's House. And he said, "You got to do a book. This is crazy, man. You guys are doing such cool things here, and what you did at the Rainbow Room and everything." And by the way, I had tried to write a book at the Rainbow Room. I'm sitting, I had some editor types from Dell Books, which was nearby in one of the skyscrapers, and they came in every afternoon for cocktails. I said, "You ought to be writing a book, I said, "Hey, you think so?" "Yeah, this is, no one's ever done this stuff. Look at that menu. God, this hasn't been done for God knows when, this would be a killer book." I said, "I think you're right." And I started working on it. I said, "I got the recipes all done. That part's done." I said, "The recipes," and so I started sending stuff to them. And of course, Joe knows everybody. He's been building restaurants in Midtown since 1953. And so the CEO of Dell calls up Joe and says, "Hey, Joe, there's a guy at your bar who's writing a book about the Rainbow Room." "Well, let me tell you." "Get down here." The executive floor is on the 43rd floor, and we were on the 65th floor. And I walked in the door, and I didn't even get through the door. And he goes, "What the hell do you think you're doing?" "How dumb are you?" he said. "Number one, we don't even own the name Rainbow. It's owned by Rockefeller Center. And if anybody's going to write a book about this place, it's going to be me." And I snuck out of there, just really happy I hadn't heard those words, "You're fired." But that was the end of my book ambitions. But John said, "You got to do this." And by then the Rainbow Room was gone. And I'm thinking, well, maybe, and I just didn't want to. I was busy and I didn't have time to run around Midtown, going to publishers' offices. I said, why couldn't we just have drinks and stories and, they could come here? And then we closed. So I called Wally Maloof over on 56th Street, who had a beautiful open fire grill restaurant. And that's where Audrey went to work after she left the Blackbird. And that was the name of I call it a pop-up now because it closed after 10 months. She went over there after we closed. And I said, "Waldy, can I borrow your bar between 3 and 4? And I said, "John, I got a bar. If you can get people at exactly 3 and they got to be out by 4 and they got to pay a check, but I'll make them drinks and I'll tell them stories." Said, "Done." So over the course of 2 weeks, he got like 6, and it wasn't an editor. It was like 5 editors, because as soon as they found out there's going to be free drinks and Dale DeGroff making drinks and stories, bam, I got the whole editorial floor coming in, and I had to work my ass off. I had an hour to do this, right? Anyway, from that, we got 3 offers on the book. And of course, John, being the man that he is, he said, "Dale, I want you to stick to your principles and go for the most money." And that's how it happened, Shawn. That's how the Craft of the Cocktail #1 happened.
Really, Craft of the Cocktail in 2001. Like I've been in the industry since 97 now, 98. So I'm one of the younger, older guys where I'm pre-internet, I'm pre-social media. Like I have still back home in Australia, I have about 500 books in storage that I'll never be able to afford to bring to Canada with me. But every time I passed a bookstore, it would be almost like an OCD thing. I'd have to go into the bookstore, see if I could find anything that I didn't have, and then I would take that book and I'd cross-reference it with this book. And I've got a couple of notebooks that I worked on in the Whit Sundays for 6 months, and I literally would take a stack of 12 books down to the beach, and I'd go, okay, French 75. What's the history notes from this cocktail book? Says the French 75 was this, and the next one says this. And so then I try and piece together history notes and stuff like that.
Exactly when I did the first Rainbow Room menu, and I would find multiple warring recipes. It was a bit of a chore to try to figure it all out. And I had to figure out simple syrup and sour mix. Because none of us had done that, and that was a whole ball of wax. What's the size of the glass? Do you want to do 2 to 1 or 1 to 1? All this stuff. And by the way, if you can see behind me, those shelves, 1, 2, 3, we can't see them all, are filled with my collection of over the years, old books. And that's about half of what I had when we moved into this house about 5 months ago. I gave the rest.
Yeah, but you were lucky. You were getting Jerry Thomas's for a couple of bucks a piece instead
of.
Oh
no, back then
it costs now.
Yeah, I got stuff early on. But I gave a lot of it to the Museum of the American Cocktail in New Orleans, which is now housed in the Southern Food and Beverage Museum down there. So I unloaded a lot of stuff.
So Craft the
But
Cocktail
anyway, that
comes
was
out
the
in
story of
2001.
what's that?
Craft the Cocktail comes out in 2001, sort of really as the top of the wave is about to white and to crash for the craft cocktail scene. What made you do it? What made you do an updated one after 20 years?
Well, for a lot of the reasons that I talked about before, I wanted to talk about 9/11 because I was there September 10th, 2001. I closed the bar. I did a seminar. We had a series of seminars happening up there in the Skybox, which was a private members bar overlooking the main bar, like a half a floor up in the whatever you call it, the median, the mezzanine. And I had done the event, and I had a lot of friends that came to it. So we went down to the bar, and we ended up closing the joint. We had several bottles of champagne, we had dinner, and then there was a woman DJ who was fantastic, and we all danced. And I woke up the next morning and watched the building fall down. And what happened to New York after that was the story I wanted to tell. I mean, I thought this book would fall on deaf ears, basically, and because the whole hospitality industry went in the toilet for 18 months. It wasn't until 2003 that everybody said, well, that's it. The hell with you. We're not giving up our lifestyle for these assholes. And everybody came back gangbusters. And this book, by the way, I didn't really want to do the new edition because I have been making money on this book, Shawn, since I wrote it. I mean, I paid the reasonably sizable advance off in about 4.5 to 5 years. And ever since then, this book has been paying a really nice dividend, in royalties. And I thought, well, the money they're going to give me, and as publishing has changed because of the internet, the upfront money, unless you're a best-selling New York Times author, has gone down. So I thought, well, why would I want to take this money and work my butt off for 1.5 to 2 years when I'm making money off this book now? I know it's old-fashioned. I know it needs a facelift, but it was a book of its time. This book, to me, was the book I wanted when I was 24 years old and there was no internet and what the hell is going on. All there was old Mr. Boston and Stephen Kittredge Cunningham's books, which were those long black books, lists of ingredients, no photographs, no clue about how to make the garnish or what garnish should look like. So I got pictures in here. I got all kind of stuff that you needed, that I needed as a young bartender. And so it was useful, for not just young bartenders, people at home. I mean, the general audience has kept this book alive. And so I told the publisher, no, that was 2 years ago. Well, actually 4 years ago, because this took 1.5 years to produce. And finally, my agent said, you ain't getting any younger. If you want to stay relevant, pal, this might be the time to do that book. So we pushed hard and got a little bit more money. And then I started thinking about, what am I going to say? I don't want to get into molecular. I don't want to get into sous vide. This is not me. That's them, Yeah. But I do make drinks with a high degree of deliciousness. I always have. I understand balance. I'd like to showcase these guys that are doing these wonderful things. Not that they haven't got stuff out there already. And I'd like to tell the story of why they are here. Because in here is that story about the 30 years of culinary revolution that preceded our wonderful cocktail revolution. And without that, Shawn, there wouldn't have been any cocktail revolution. If it hadn't been going way back 50 years to when Joe opened the Four Seasons restaurant in the famous Seagram's building, a restaurant that changed its menu 4 times a year, that had a freshwater and saltwater fish tanks for fresh fish. It flew in vegetables from around the world in those days because they hadn't made deals, except in the summer when he made deals with farmers. And then across town, 1 year later, he opens in another brand new building, the Time Life building in 1960. He opens a place called La Fonda del Sol, a study of the foods of South America, Central America, the Caribbean, the Americas, and no one had done that. He sent people down there to get recipes. And guess what he had on his cocktail menu? And how I found all this out? When I worked at the ad agency, all that stuff was in the old files at Restaurant Associates. I'm going through those files because I was bored in the mailroom, And here's this menu from 1960. La Fonda del Sol has got the margarita, 3 mezcal drinks, pisco sour, I didn't know
What?
what the stuff was. I had no idea what it was. The Mojito Criollo. And I'm looking at this menu going, wow, this is cool stuff. I wonder what it is. Because I wasn't in the business yet, right? And yeah, those were on his menu. And he had to import pisco, he had to import mezcal, and he had to import to the East Coast because it was only on the West Coast tequila. So Joe was like decades out in front, of this stuff. When Joe told me to make a menu with classic cocktails, he had done that already in another New York restaurant that had a life and then was gone. And
So he was setting you up. He was setting you up. He's like, well, if you can't do it, I've already done it. It was just 30 years ago. If you can't do it
he
now,
wasn't
you're kind
setting
of.
me up. He wanted someone to do the. See what Joe's genius was is that he had a vision of a new American way of dining and eating, a new American cuisine. He wanted wine back on the table, or on the table, because we weren't really wine drinkers. He wanted the cocktail to come back. It's as David Wonder said, it's the first American culinary art form, the cocktail. That's what David called it. And true or not, it sure makes sense to me. And this is what he wanted. He wanted this experience with this small fine dining restaurant was a workshop for him, and he wasn't a francophile. He brought, Gerard Pangot, this two-star Michelin chef guy, because he wanted to jump on the business. He wanted to make money, but he wasn't thinking about that. He was thinking about the Rainbow Room, and that's what I was doing those drinks for, even though I didn't know it at the time. So he hadn't really done the hard work. He had done those drinks in the 60s, and he got the right recipes from there, because he had people down in Peru, he had people down in Brazil, in the Caribbean, and finding these recipes and bringing them north. It was an extraordinary time. And when I put the caipirinha back on the Rainbow Room menu in 1990, Joe was walking by. Oh, and the pisco sour, by the way, around the same time. I didn't have it on the original menu, but when I put it on the second menu, also early 90s, Joe was like, He didn't tell me to do that. I found those drinks. He didn't tell me what to do at all, except that initial conversation. Get me classic drinks and make them right and make them real. Granted, we had tastings, so if I screwed up, he let me know. But it was an extraordinary person. He was an extraordinary. He changed the way we eat and drink in America. One of the people, but he certainly jump started a lot of things that had been moribund for a long time. We came out of 2 world wars, prohibition, the worst economic downturn ever. By the 50s, we were TV dinners, canned food, processed this, processed that, and we were totally happy about it. Oh, the convenience of it all. You mean we can get green beans year round? Forget the fact that they're cut short like this, really soft and mushy and kind of not so green. The fact that they were in a can, we could open and heat it up and eat it. We were happy with that stuff. Women were happy to have formula out of the can to feed their kids, even though doctors found out decades later that the child that was missing out on all the things the mother had to offer, like things that she had built up in her body that were healthy and that she could pass on to the child. So we were lost. We were lost on the culinary side. It was Joe that broke that with those 2 restaurants that I mentioned, and then you had Alice Waters, and you had Galton Malot, who created Nouvelle Cuisine, which jumped the Atlantic, with all those wonderful chefs from that era, and then Joe found another man who shared his vision right in the beginning in the 50s, James Beard. So from Windows on the World and La Fonda, James stayed with him as a consultant until he died in 1987 and worked on every single restaurant, And when they opened Windows on the World, they had wanted to hire, do you know the chef Jeremiah Tower?
Yes.
Stars Restaurant in San Francisco. Jeremiah was hired in 1973 by Alice Waters because he had classic training, and she was unhappy with the architecture of the plate at Chez Panisse, the famous Chez Panisse. So he came on and he took over as chef, and he did beautiful work with these plates and everything. And then in 1976, he did something called Northern California Regional Dinner, with all local foods and fishes and all local wines, locavore before the word existed, And Joe and Beard heard about him, and Beard had gone out to Chez Panisse, and he said, "This is our guy." But he had already for Windows on the World, but he had already signed with the people that were going to develop Stars, his own restaurant, where he was an owner, not just the chef, So he turned them down when they made the offer, if they ever made it, because they found out where he was at. But it was an extraordinary time, and this audience that was built during that 30-year period, if you want to go back to the origins of it, 50-year period, were people that were in love with big flavor. They were willing to take chances. And that's why all these incredible ethnic cuisines exploded across New York and cities all around America. And then eventually in secondary cities, Vietnamese and Thai, and then French techniques with Chinese food. You get this fusion thing happening, Pacific Rim, they called it, Hakusan, fine dining Cantonese for the first time in a long time. Cantonese was always the garbage food, for the fast the giveaway stuff at the corner where you went down and got the little cardboard boxes of lo mein, But it was an amazing time. And that audience, that's the audience that we played to when we started getting fancy, in the craft cocktail movement. And by the way, when I lost Windows and my little pop-up closed, and I'm promoting my book. That's how I'm an expert now, because I got a book and I'm running around the country, doing seminars, promoting brands. But I was also doing cocktail safaris in New York, and I was curating neighborhoods, Soho, Greenwich Village, East Village. And, in 1998, when I started this, there wasn't a whole lot going on in the classic cocktail world, but there were things going on. Eben Clem, Evan Freeman, Julie Reiner, they were out there, hiding here and there. And, there was Keith McNally, who had cool stuff. So I would go in, we would do 4 tastes of drinks and 4 bites of food to go with those tastes. And then people found out about it, and they started hiring me. New York Magazine hired me to do an article about it, and they sent some writers with me. And that's when I heard from Jonathan Downey. Do you know Jonathan in London?
No.
He was the Match Bar Group guy who opened Milk and Honey London and had the Match Bar Group, Margaret Street, had Socho. It was one of the 3, I think, foundational London companies that brought, starting in 1994 with the Atlantic Bar and Grill and Peyton and Dick Bradsell, the godfather of the London scene. In 1994 was the beginning date when they opened Atlantic Bar and Grill and Dick's Bar, and then one after another, Lab Bar, the Breakfast Company. The Breakfast Company was called, and then the Match Bar Group. Well, Jonathan called me up because he was also coincidentally writing cocktail articles for Esquire UK. And he wanted me to come over and teach classic cocktails to some of his bartenders in his newly formed Match Bar Group. And I said, well, I'm pretty busy right now, but let's talk about it. He said, I'm coming to New York, and I said, oh, maybe, I'm doing this cocktail safari. I'll call the guys at New York Magazine. They may not want another magazine on the gig, but I'll call them and ask them. And they said, we don't care. It's UK, it's not going to be published in this country. So yeah, he can come. So he came. And this was, I want to say 2000, just after Sasha had opened on Eldridge Street, Milk and Honey. And I waited till the end, and we split away from the group when the safari was over. And I said, Jonathan, we're going to go to one more place. I want you to meet a guy. And he was behind the bar by himself in that era. He was dead broke. He didn't have a lot of money. He opened on a shoestring, and it had been a mahjong parlor down underneath the Chinese tenement. And he was very, very solicitous of the neighbors. The Chinese landlord did not want to rent to him when he found out he was going to open a bar. And he swore up and down. He said, the first time there's a problem, you can throw me out, whatever. Honest to God, I'm going to be a good tenant. I'm not going to have noise in the street. It's going to be. That's why Sasha never intended to open a speakeasy. He had a little tiny place. And he said to everybody who came in, he said, I'm enjoyed having you here. I would ask you, don't bring anybody back here with you unless you would bring them into your own home or into your mother's home. Basically is what he said to him. And please don't talk to anybody in the press, anybody, because I don't want anyone to write about this place, And it was going along fine for about 18 months. And then somebody did write about it. And then he locked the door. He just stuck his head out and he said, closed, locked the door, and the line went away. And the people that were regulars, he sent notes to them or gave them a phone number that they could call in and make a reservation. And from that moment on, it wasn't that he wanted to lock the door. Believe me, he never even thought about having a speakeasy. And yet now he's dead. He's the man that everybody around the world says reinvented the speakeasy, which is such an irony. Anyway, John and I went there at 2 a.m, and left at 4, and he made tons of drinks for us. And it was just a lovely evening. And then we got out onto the sidewalk, and Donnie looks to me and he says, you know something, mate? This would be a cracking club in London. 1 year later, Milk and Honey opened on Pole Street in a 5-story building as a private club. Because John was an attorney who had written oil contracts in Bahrain. He got shit done. When he had a project, he got it done. And that year I went to work for him in London, 2003. I went to work for him the year we opened Milk and Honey London, and Dick had left the company as cocktail director, and I joined the company as cocktail director. And what I saw in London, not then, but in 1998, my first trip for Ideal Marketing, when I went to Atlantic Bar and Grill to do a cocktail competition. The judges were Michael Jackson, the Beer Hunter, Salvatore Calabrese from then, he was still at Duke's, Peter Dorelli from the Savoy, Dick Bradsell, and me. And there were 250 London bartenders there, and there was a competition, and the 7 finalists were going to present in front of everybody. But I was hired by Ideal Marketing, and Ideal Marketing was hired by Seagram's to bring Absolute vodka to the UK because they were only in the United States, And John Beach of Ideal Marketing, he was with a company called Peters and Beach first, which was just a promo company. But this was a separate company formed with Seagram's to promote Absolute. He called me at the Rain Room, right away. And he said, okay, I need you to come over here. And so he brought me over in 98 for this thing. And he said, I want you to make your Rainbow Room cosmopolitan for all these bartenders, 200 of them, right? So we got the bartenders all together, and I flamed all 200 of those cosmopolitans. Boom, 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 boom. And everybody's like, what the hell is that? And that was the introduction of the Cosmopolitan. Although as cocktail director at the Mash Bar Group, I was not allowed to even have cranberry juice. I was not allowed to make the Cosmopolitan because John thought it was a bullshit drink. So what did I do? I got cloudberry juice and I made it anyway. Cloudberry juice is very similar to cranberry juice, right? Comes from Scandinavia. Anyway, those were the years in London. And you know what they were doing in London? What we weren't doing in the 90s, in the late 90s? Muddling strawberry with basil leaves and doing all this very culinary stuff. It was really them that started that, not us. That came from London. That whole thing was a London idea. And the reason John wanted me to be his cocktail director, because he was fed up with all the fruit and the muddling and all that, and the thyme and the rosemary. And he said, I want these guys to learn the classics, because he was a classic cocktail drinker. And he said, I don't care if they make that stuff, but I want classic cocktails in all of my bars, and I want them made properly. And that's why he brought me over. So.
So what do you think of the current state of the cocktail scene?
Oh, I think it's magnificent. Right up until COVID, I think that it's gotten beyond its growing pains. Like Nouvelle got beyond its growing pains with the 15-inch plates and the little tiny scallop and 19 colored dots, and that was your entree. But we've gotten past that in the culinary side, and the whole self-consciousness of having all these house-made and focusing so much on and covering the front of your bar with thousands of little bottles that were all your tinctures and house made this and house made that. So you had a wall between you and the guest, and really the guest was like there as an observer to watch you make these incredible, works of art. And I think when they got over that phase and they started still making great drinks that were interesting as hell, but did it like they were any old drink, and just engaged with the customers and realized that they were there for fun. They weren't there because you had, 16 kinds of ice and 42 different herbs that you put in your drink and you grew them in your backyard. They really didn't care about that. Some did. And those were the ones you could talk about and talk to about. I know David Wondrich, when he came out with the punch book, he went around to a lot of these places. He said, guys, on Saturday night, when you get the Bridge and Tunnel crowd, and you can't be doing the tweezer drinks for everybody because you're packed, why don't you institute a punch program? And you can have all the shrubs in the refrigerator. You can pour the shrub in and pour the bottle in with a block of ice, put it on the table. We're done. We're done here. Then you can go up to the bar and make some tweezer drinks and then go make another bowl of punch. It would be a way to get beyond that Saturday night rush, And that's, I think, why a lot of bars started doing bowls of punch, proper bowls of punch, with a shrub.
So I'm not gonna take up any more of your time because I could talk to you for hours and hours and hours. This is literally a bucket list podcast for me. So I am so happy that
I'm with you. Yes. I would talk for.
I wasn't expecting. It's interesting because I still am the 26-year-old Australian kid who came to Canada, and I still fanboy out ridiculously hard when I get to chat to people like yourselves, Julie, Angus, and Angus and I have known each other for 20 years. So I want to thank you.
Did we meet at the bar show in Australia? Is that where we met?
I think we met at the bar show in Australia. We've done, I think when you came for Tales of the Cocktail in Vancouver, we met there too. But it's never like really meeting per se. It's passing at events, and nowadays with Facebook and everything, you go to Tales and you walk through the Monte Leone and you're like, I know you, but I don't really know you. Like, we're friends on Facebook. We may have commented on each other's posts a couple of times, but that's pretty much it. But
World Class. I think we met when I was judging World Class all across Canada. I did the finals, the Canadian finals. I'm losing you.
Mike, awesome.
I lost you.
I wasn't in the finals that year, but I came over to Vancouver to watch and check it out. But thank you so much for your time, Dale. I really, really appreciate it.
It was good. And thank you for promoting my book, The New Craft of the Cocktail.
No problems at all. Thank you so much. Good luck with the virtual book tour.
Yes.
And I'll chat to you very soon.
All right, Shawn, it's been a pleasure.
Ciao. Thank you, sir.